think we'll get started now. Looks like people are in. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. If you weren't able to attend one of the in-person meetings, we're really glad that you could join us for a virtual session. We'll be answering questions at the end via the chat function. So if you do have a question, just enter it in there and we'll get to it. We're going to do our best to answer any questions you have tonight. If there is something that we aren't able to answer off of at the tip of our fingertips tonight, we will take it away and we'll follow up and place that information on the website. So with that, Andrea, let's get started. So a little bit about what we're going to cover this evening. So one of the first things we're going to look at is just in general the rate case process. So it's important to understand how your rates as a regulated utility customer are regulated. They're set, they're determined through a pretty complex process by the Arizona Corporation Commission. So we'll just walk through that as a very high level. And then we're going to go back to where we started in 2018. It's been a very fast moving 5 years. Incredible amount of work has been done. So we're just kind of take everyone back, and then we're going to look at where we are now, 5 years later. Then we'll dive into the current rate application that's in front of the Corporation Commission. And that's the procedural notice that you received in the mail or in your bill, depending on your billing preference. And then we're going to round up with a little bit of information about our customer assistance programs and some other information that's helpful to you throughout the rate case process. Next slide, please. So a little bit about EPCOR before we get started. So we're actually a North American company, and we provide regulated water service in Arizona and New Mexico. You can see there's a lot of detail, a lot of stats on this slide. And I would like to point out that this PowerPoint will be available to be downloaded probably by the end of the day tomorrow, as well as this recording that we are doing tonight. But of all the stats on this slide, and there certainly are many, one of the things I do want to point out, it's one of my favorite things to point out, is the 300 plus safety and operational excellence awards that you see noted towards the bottom. And the reason I want to point that out is because, well, first of all, it has nothing to do with me, but it is my opportunity to talk a little bit about the operations team that really provides your service every day. So they've been recognized this many times in the state of Arizona for safety and operational excellence. And 5 years ago, Santan would not be one of those systems. And 5 years later, they are being recognized for that work. So really proud of our team and really want to point out that they are the ones doing the hard work day in and day out. And all of the work you're going to hear about tonight and the photos you're going to see, they were in the trenches, on the ground, doing all of those improvements. Next slide, please. So I'm going to come back to this topic a little bit later in the presentation, but first, just want to give you some high-level information about our approach and our what we do with the water that we collect. So this is the wastewater that comes away from your homes or your businesses. What happens to that water? So obviously, we all live here in Arizona. Every drop should be used, saved, reused. And that's something that we, like many other utilities and municipalities, are very focused on as well. So when we first started, Santan wasn't really participating in this because Santan didn't have the ability to really reclaim that water. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But to date, and this number will be updated at the end of 2024, EPCOR has actually put 21.8 billion gallons of water back into the natural water cycle. That could be aquifer recharge, that could be irrigating public spaces or farmlands. Some of the water we treat even goes to Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station to help cool down the towers. Now, if you want a visual on what that looks like, imagine 67,000 football fields side by side covered in a foot of water. That's how much water this equates to, and that's how much gets put back into the cycle. Today, EPCOR recycles about 95.5% of the wastewater we collect. Our goal, just like everyone else, is to use every drop. Next slide, please. So a little bit of Santan area, just to give us a little bit of perspective on the geographic area we're talking about. You may have seen this image before at previous community meetings. The image on the slide could be a little bit deceiving because it doesn't really reflect the sheer scope of this area. So you can see on the slide that there's Areas where we provide water only, there are going to be areas where we provide sewer only or wastewater only, and then areas where both overlap and we provide both services. The area that you're looking at, encompassing the entire Santan water and wastewater district that we serve, is 160 square miles. So when you see the information in this presentation, just think about the sheer magnitude of the work that had to be done. It wasn't concentrated in just one area, and certainly wasn't a small area that we had to cover. Next slide, please. So let's look at the rate case process. So we are a regulated utility, and what that means, excuse me, is that EPCOR cannot make any changes without getting the approval of the Arizona Corporation Commission. And unlike a municipal process where there might be a couple of public meetings, a couple council sessions, it's a very long process for the Arizona Corporation Commission to review, thoroughly vet all of the information they have, and ultimately come back with a decision that they think is the most prudent decision for both the company and the customer. The formal rate application process actually takes about 24 to 30 months. So it's certainly not a quick process, but that means every little piece is being looked at. All of the expenses that we have are reviewed, they're approved by the ACC, and they're going to look at all of those expenses and all of those investments and see whether or not they're prudent and were they used and useful for you, the customer. So in terms of prudency, just to give you sort of an example, imagine we had to replace an 8-inch pipe underground. It's an 8-inch water pipe. It's been there a while. It's at the end of its useful life, and we need to replace it. We cannot just arbitrarily go in and make a decision to say, we're going to make it a 12-inch pipe just because we might need it in the future. And while we're at it, we're going to upgrade the material just because we want to. The ACC will look at expenses like that and they will disallow them from what's included in your rates. So really it's our responsibility as a utility to be as prudent and strategic with the investments that we make and look for cost efficiencies wherever we can find them. As part of the rate case process, there's really only 2 times that we are required to communicate with customers. The first is the procedural order, which you received in the mail or by email, and I referenced that a little bit earlier. It's a legal document that really kind of walks through the process that's going to be followed. And the second time we have to communicate with customers is after rates are approved. Now, we don't think that's quite enough. We want to make sure our customers have the information they need and that they know about changes well before they're going to happen. So that's why we hold these meetings. These aren't required, but we want to make sure you have access and you can ask us questions. We make sure that all of that information is also hosted on our website. And along the way, if there are changes, we make sure you're aware of those as well. The entire process is overseen by an administrative law judge. So it is a very formal process. It is very carefully vetted, and I can assure you that the customers, what's important to the customer is carefully weighed as part of that process. Now, if we look at the actual rates themselves, and I'm not doing justice to the amount of work or the numbers that are involved in this, in the complex math, but it essentially boils down to 3 buckets. So it's the capital investment or the money that is spent to keep your system in really good working order. That could be repairing a major pipe. It could be rehabilitating a piece of equipment like a major facility, or it could be replacing it when something needs to be replaced. So that bucket right there is going right back into your system to make sure your service remains safe and reliable. The second bucket is operating costs. So operating costs, things like our power bill to run the system, chemicals to help treat, the cost of labor, property tax even. Those are considered operating costs that are passed through dollar for dollar into the rate calculations. So what that means is if the power bill goes up, you see that change in the numbers, but there is no markup beyond that. EPCOR does not keep any of those costs. They are strictly passed through dollar for dollar, not marked up at all. And then the third bucket, which is really the smallest bucket, is the return on investment. So EPCOR has an opportunity to earn a return on the capital that we put into the ground. But as I'm going to show you in a minute, it's a very small portion, and it is it is set at a limit, so we can't actually earn above a certain amount unless, according to what the Arizona Corporation Commission approves. Next slide, please. So we're going to share with you, what does a dollar of your bill look like? So I am also an EPCOR customer. So if I looked at my bill and I said, okay, what is it really going to? We take this dollar and we break it out so we can show you essentially what you're paying for as part of your service. Next slide, please. You can see the first third of that bill goes straight back into your system. That's that capital investment I was talking about. It's investing in your system, it's in the plants, it's in the pipes, it's in the equipment. We take that 32 cents, or round numbers. This is an average across all of our systems, so please consider this an illustrative exercise, if you will. But that first third of the dollar goes right back into your system to make sure that you don't have the kind of experiences that you've had in the past. Next slide. The remaining 2/3, almost entirely, goes straight into those operating costs. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, where they're passed through into the rate calculations dollar for dollar. They are not changed from the actual hard cost. They simply get passed through and factored into the equation. Next slide, please. And then you see we have this final piece. It's the smallest piece of that dollar. And again, this is just an example average. But what you can see is that it's a very small portion of the dollar. That is the opportunity to earn a return on investment. And the reason I stress opportunity is because we're not guaranteed to receive that return on investment. And the Corporation Commission does put a ceiling in place that doesn't allow us to go beyond that. Now, next slide, please. Now, if we eat into the operating costs, that 3 cents is going to go down. The only area we can earn a return is on the capital investment, that first third, which is essentially funds that EPCOR invests in the system years in advance of when they show up in your rates. So again, it's capped at a certain level, single digits, and there's no guarantee that we're going to get it. Next slide, please. And like I said, that remaining 2/3, if those costs go up, they eat into that return on investment. So it's our responsibility to not only protect you as a customer with getting the most efficient and most cost-effective resources and solutions for your service, but it's also very much part of how we look at the entire dollar bill. Next slide, please. So in preparing for these meetings this week, I spent a lot of time going back and watching the community meetings that were held by the commission and Supervisor Goodman in Santan Valley. I read a lot of materials that you submitted. I really just kind of wanted to look back. And the slide you're seeing in front of you are your words. These are the things that you were telling us, or telling the commission at that time, were your challenges. And when you look at this, and I could have made multiple slides with all of the comments that were made, but I really pulled the primary themes out. And essentially, what you're saying is your service was terrible. You needed it fixed. Something like you can't take a shower because the water pressure is not there. Smells coming out of your faucets when we provide the water service, or Johnson Utilities provided it. Bad odors, can't go outside, a river of sewage from a manhole spraying sewage. And my personal favorite, I can't flush my stool after midnight until 6 a.m. This is what you experienced. This is where you started. This is where this system started. So I'm going to show you some pictures of all of these things that we found right in the beginning. EPCOR was appointed interim manager of the Johnson Utility System in August of 2018. And from the very first moment we walked through the door, we saw what you were experiencing. Next slide, please. So a few stats just before we get to the pictures. So in 2018, and some of these numbers date back to April of 2018, but I can tell you most of them are from when we stepped in. But by April of 2018, the customers had recorded 530 complaints against Johnson Utilities, and they ranged customer billing, health concerns, odor, service levels, but that's an incredible number of complaints. There were also 78 sewer overflows in the year before EPCOR stepped in as interim manager. That's the most of any utility. And if you really think about that, 78 sewer overflows, and then you look at how many days are in a calendar year, it's just a really overwhelming amount that needed to be dealt with. In fact, when we first stepped in, the very first day, we found an active and ongoing sewer overflow at the main yard facility. Took us about 4 weeks to get that under control. There were things like stop valves that were inoperable, lift station pumps that were undersized. But this was really what we saw right from the start, and this is one of your major concerns. We also looked at the water. You had a lot of water pressure concerns, and your water loss was very, very high. So the state standard is actually 10% or less water loss for a utility service. And at the time that we stepped in, Johnson Utilities was losing 24%. It's actually just a hair above 24%. And if you think of that, for every 3 gallons of the water that was going through, 1 gallon was lost. So if you do the math, and we finally found the pipe that was leaking this, 1 million gallons per day was leaking through this pipe. Wasn't really on many maps. It took a lot of detective work from our team. And we estimate that it probably had been leaking for about a decade. Now, if you do that math, you end up with 3.65 billion gallons of water that was just simply lost. In Arizona, we know that's a non-starter. We know we have to preserve and carefully use every single drop. So this was a very significant milestone for the team in finding this leak, and it's significant for you, and it's significant for Arizona's water supply. We found other safety issues, not just for you, the customer, but also for the team operating the system, pipes bypassing systems to dump into manholes, just unsafe conditions on both sides. Next slide, please. We also conducted an engineering review. And the engineering review that was completed just months after we stepped in, within about 2 months, identified 22 water projects and 48 wastewater projects that were deemed critical and necessary in order to take your water and wastewater systems off of life support and bring them to the standard that is expected of a utility, not just by the industry and by EPCOR, but as you, the customer, the service you expect to receive. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through a couple pictures. This is a manhole. You can see all clogged up. And what I want to point out about this is certainly there's maintenance. There's always going to be maintenance. But what you probably don't realize, because we don't see the work that's done, is when these types of things happen, it isn't just damage to the system and to the service that you're receiving and causes sewer overflows and things like that. This has to be manually cleaned out by the operating team. So I kind of believe that wastewater operators are, unsung heroes because they're doing a job that is very difficult and that most of us simply wouldn't want to do. Next slide, please. Few more examples. So the slide on the right side of the screen is just another example of pulling a pump out of the ground and just the state it's in. The image on the left is actually one that I took. So this was taken in July, August of 2018 at Section 11. And I can tell you from experience that I understand why you were unhappy with Section 11. It was a very, very hot day. And what you're seeing is a crane that is lifting sludge out of those lagoons that run at Section 11. And we'll talk a little bit about that later, but just gives you a sense of magnitude for how much had to be pulled out of that in order to get it to a decent operating state. Next slide, please. This image was taken not too long after we became the interim manager. This is an example of one of those many, many sewer overflows that you as customers were dealing with. You can see there's homes in the background. There's a fairly large amount of water there. And so prior to us stepping in, one of the things was not just that the sewer overflows were happening, but the cleanup was not effective either. So this just gives you a good visual on those 78 sewer overflows that I mentioned. This is what you were dealing with. Next slide, please. Just a few pictures of some of the conditions that we saw. These are the insides of pipes. You see that pool of water that's actually at section 11. You can see it's not very well kept. And an example of what I meant by safety conditions and bypassing in some temporary solutions. This is not how EPCOR operates a system, and we wouldn't want our operators working in this kind of an environment from a safety perspective. So just giving you an overview for the kinds of things that we found that we know that you had been experiencing. Next slide. This picture here is actually a picture of a Section 11 lagoon before it was cleaned. So Section 11 is an outdated facility that relies on lagoons, 4 lagoons to be exact. It's open air, so obviously anything goes wrong with these lagoons in terms of the treatment process, the community around it is going to experience that, and you have experienced it. Section 11, we went in right away and started cleaning it up. That's that sludge picture you saw recently. And we brought it back to the best condition we could without costing you, the customer, more money than necessary, and also recognizing that it's just simply technology that isn't equipped to deal with what Santan Valley needs. Next slide, please. So just in general, in terms of the projects that we knew we had to get started with, there were anything from drilling new wells to equipping wells that weren't already in service. We had to replace pipelines, lots of valves. We improved booster stations. So water pressure was a significant concern for everyone, and we found solutions for that. It was, in some cases, as simple as correcting an air pocket that would build up, that would restrict the flow of water. We also had to look at the future of Pinal County. What does that mean in terms of the water resources, your pressure, your wastewater flows? We had to fix all of those things so that Pinal County can grow into the future that you want it to be. Next slide, please. On the wastewater side, obviously the recharge basins and the sludge removal, we had to repair a lot of lift stations. And I just want to draw your attention to the lift stations. So lift stations are there to help move wastewater along when it encounters an obstacle of some kind. Maybe it's a small incline or something like that. An ideal wastewater system runs on gravity. Gravity is free. It moves the wastewater where you want it to go. And occasionally booster stations are needed. And these are typically designed strategically, so part of a master plan. Now, when we stepped in, Johnson Utilities had 36 lift stations, and at that time, that was more than the entire city of Phoenix. So clearly an example of how the system that we were stepping into was just simply, it was poorly planned, it was poorly run, and it was, as I've said, on life support. We had to replace a lot of valves on the wastewater side as well. There were sewer pipes that needed to be not just replaced and repaired, but simply cleaned. So typically in the industry, the standard is that pipes are cleaned about 20% of the system every year, so that every 5 years we're cycling back and there's a routine period of cleaning. That wasn't happening. So that was one of our big priorities right from the start as well. And then reducing the sewer overflows. I can tell you that when we stepped in for at least the first 6 months, the director of water quality and I were on the phone every Friday and every Saturday. So while we were not necessarily experiencing it the way you were, we know that it was very, very difficult. Next slide, please. So let's come back to 5 years later. Where are we today? So I'm going to skip past this first one. We're going to talk about it more in a minute, but you can see clearly a lot of money had to be spent to improve the system. One of the capstones of that is the $80 million, 3 million gallon per day Copper Basin water reclamation facility, which actually we just celebrated celebrated the completion and opening of several weeks ago. So not only does this provide a regional solution for wastewater, a much bigger facility with state-of-the-art technology that will treat the wastewater. It's fully enclosed. It uses heavily organic processes. The technology that's in the system is award-winning. It replaces Section 11. Now, unfortunately, you have to keep Section 11 running until this facility was up and running, and we're now at that point. So now that Copper Basin is online, we are able to start the process of decommissioning those lagoons, the ones that are open air and clearly in bad shape, or they're in better shape now, but need to be shut down. We're on track to do that by the end of 2025, just as we're required to do. So that process is beginning. Copper Basin is online. That's a significant step forward for your wastewater system. We expanded existing facilities. So Pecan was one of the very first, actually. We added 1 million gallons per day of capacity to treat the wastewater. And we did the same with Anthem. So one of the things that was really key was, and this really comes from master plan, the lack of master planning was the facilities that were in place and the pipelines, the way they were mapped out, were just simply not able to accommodate the flow of effluent or wastewater that was coming from the residents and the homes in businesses in Santan Valley. So one of the very first priorities had to be making it possible to accept that flow and treat it. We had to look at your water certainty and pressure. So we wanted to make sure not only did you have water, that you had the pressure to do things with it. We wanted you to be able to take a shower and flush the toilet on the second floor. So that was a very important first step for us as well. And when we first got there, you were clearly unhappy, and rightfully so. But very pleased to share with you that today you're reporting about a 95% customer satisfaction. I think it's really hard to get 100%, but we're very proud of that because that reflects the work that we've done to help you. We also were able to lift the moratorium on new meters for new homes. That's really important to Pinal County just as a region because that's your future. Next slide, please. A couple of other things I just want to share. So when you look at the numbers in the rest of this presentation, I want you to keep in mind a couple of things. So first of all, there's about just over 31 million, 31.3 to be exact, in customer costs that have already been deleted or removed. You will never see those in your rates. That includes a write-off right from the beginning, and it also includes a portion of the Copper Basin construction costs. A couple of other things. So many of you participated in a class action lawsuit against Johnson Utilities, and when that settlement needed to be distributed, we were asked to help with that. And we've been told many, many times by the outside legal counsel for that settlement that if we hadn't done this through the billing process, which is how you received your settlement, there would have been significantly less available to customers. So the amount available to you was more. If it had been done another way, it obviously would have decreased. And the only expense that EPCOR incurred for that entire process was $1,752, simply the price of the paper that was sent to you to notify you of the settlement decision. We've also found tax refund dollars that are going to be coming back to you. So roughly $400,000 in refunds that will be dispersed out through the billing process. And this one is extremely important. So when we stepped in, none of the wastewater that was collected and treated was being put back to good use. So essentially all of that water was being wasted. And in Arizona, our goal is always, EPCOR and every other utility, to reclaim that effluent and make sure it's treated to the highest standards possible, and that we reuse it for things like recharging the underground aquifer, irrigating public spaces, providing it for sale to farms in the area. Some of the wastewater even goes to, as I mentioned earlier, help with Palo Verde's operations. Today, after all of the changes and all of the improvements that have been made, Santan Water District our wastewater district is now able to recharge or recycle 13,500 acre feet of water every single year. If you think about the scope of that, that means that you are now contributing not only to your water portfolio as a whole, but you're contributing to Arizona's sustainable future. Next slide, please. Few more things, and I'm going to show you a few more pictures. So it's not just the big fancy projects like a copper basin that is millions and millions of dollars and is built out of the ground. Our operations team is exceptional at what they do. They're highly, highly trained, and the Santan team has more than 1,000 hours of additional training that they received shortly after we stepped in. This is a team that is very experienced. It's got its certifications and they're very, very much like detectives. So one of the things that I always love talking about with the operational team is just the solutions they come up with. The things that they have done have helped to save you millions of dollars. It's as simple as finding a more cost-effective solution than having to build a new construction project. In place of a new well, which can cost about $3 million, they found solutions that were in the $20,000 to $30,000 range. All of those things help you as the customer because it reduced the costs that are ultimately reflected in your rates. They found ways to be more energy efficient. So not only is that good for just in general for our state, it also lowers power costs. And perhaps one of the most significant things that they did was to reduce the water loss to less than 10%. So water loss in Santan in your community is now below the state standard. And remember, you started at almost 24, 25%. Another thing that was a significant concern for everyone as I looked back and remembered all of the hearings that we listened to and all of the customer comments were nitrate levels. And that was a project that we started on right of way. So we put treatment in place that would help to treat those nitrates. We also looked for other new water sources that would help us bring additional high quality water into place. So that has been a significant improvement for you as well. And we stabilized your water pressure in your supply. And again, some of those things were done through simple operation solutions that our team came up with, thinking through how can we do this most cost effectively for our customer and still get the job done. Next slide, please. So a couple pictures here, and I mentioned nitrate treatment, and this is actually, this is what this is. This is at the Mainyard facility and one of the very first projects that we completed, and there's an ion treatment process in this picture that you're looking at. So just kind of gives you a sense of some of the projects that started right away. Next slide, please. Here you see the inside of a cleaned pipe. So you saw the corroded pipes earlier. This is what it should look like after being cleaned. And again, the process and the standard is that 20% of a system's pipes are cleaned every year so that a 5-year cycle continues. Next slide, please. I showed you earlier a picture of a lagoon at Section 11. This is what it looks like today. We have cleaned it to the best extent possible. We are operating Section 11 to the best extent possible, and it's certainly not perfect. But now that Copper Basin is online, we can now start to decommission these lagoons, clean up the land, and ultimately sell it. Next slide, please. And finally, just sharing a bit of an overview of our Copper Basin facility. This is really an important facility for all customers. This facility not only replaces Section 11, it is designed in a way that gives it a much smaller footprint. The entire treatment technology is inside. So whereas Section 11 is an open air lagoon process, the treatment process here is enclosed, and we have odor scrubbers on all of our facilities to make sure that we're taking that extra step to limit any sort of odor escaping. You can also see that the facility has the ability to expand if we need it to, and that's really based on Pinal County's growth. So we design all of our facilities with the opportunity to grow over time when it's needed, and Copper Basin is no different. Next slide, please. This is just another image from Copper Basin, and the reason we included this was really to give you a sense of scale. If you see the trailer on the right side of the screen, you can kind of get a sense for how big some of these buildings are. It's a large facility, again, 3 million gallons per day, but it is up and running and taking the flows away from Section 11. Next slide, please. So really, this is, as a customer, this is what we always want to know. Like, what does this really mean for me as a customer? What does this mean for my bill? So in terms of history here, the rates that you pay today are actually based on what it cost in 2019. So the way that the rates work for regulated utilities in the state of Arizona is that you are always looking backwards. So you look at a test year, which in the current rates that you have was 2019, and you look at what capital expenses were done to that point. So if you think about it from that perspective, the rates that you're paying today are actually 5 years outdated. Now, those rates went into effect in 2022, so you've already kind of seen a lag there. And so what happens is your rates are always working to catch up with the current status of your costs. Obviously, an incredible amount of system improvements done through those 5 years. In fact, the amount of work that has been done on your system to bring it to where it is today is essentially the equivalent of what a normal, well-run utility would spend over the course of 10 to 20 years. Obviously, we couldn't wait that long. So really, when you look at these numbers, keep that in perspective that all of the work that you're seeing was necessary, it was vital, but it happened a lot faster than typically would in a well-run system. The test year for this particular application is 2023. So it ended on December 31st of that year. All of the numbers that you see in there, whether it's power costs or labor or the number of customers, are all based on that test year. It's also tied to when we have capital improvements. Now, the capital improvements are always looked at to see were they in place, are they in place to help the customer. We're certainly not going to be recouping costs from a project in the future. We get that question quite often. Why can't you collect revenue to pay for something in the future? Arizona's regulatory system doesn't work that way. It's always backwards looking. And really, what that means is that the company invests the money in your system and then goes to the Arizona Corporation Commission to ask recovery of it. Now, it's all subject to Arizona Corporation Commission approval. They carefully look at all of those numbers, and they do listen to all the customer comments that come in. So we filed this application in June of 2024, and on an earlier slide, I mentioned that the entire process from the start of the test year through to a decision can be anywhere from 24 to 30 months. We've seen it take a little longer, but where we are today, you've received the procedural order, and now there's a lot of just review going through, and you have your consumer advocate, RUCO, is also working on this as well. So this will take some time, and I'll share with you some dates with you at the end in terms of next steps. Next slide, please. I just want to take you back to that number I sort of glossed over earlier. When you look at all of those projects and when you look at where your system started and where it is today, and I talked about how this is really the amount of work that would normally happen over a 10 to 20 year span. It has required $250 million to bring your water and wastewater systems off of life support, like I said before, to the standards that should be in place. So when you look at that, and we do get questions on why is it different for water and wastewater, I showed you earlier that there were more projects necessary for wastewater than there were for water. So what we've done is we've showed you how that splits out over 5 years, and you won't see all of this in this rate case. Some of it is already in the rates you're paying from 2019. Again, some of it's been written off for your benefit. But to give you a sense of scope in terms of how much work had to be done to improve your service, you can see that the mass of the majority of it is in the wastewater side. Next slide, please. What does this mean for you as a customer? So like I said, I'm a customer as well, and I always want to know, okay, well, what do these numbers really mean? Boil it down, show me what it looks like for my bill. I can tell you that no one likes to see their rates increase, and certainly filing a rate case is not something that we are excited to do. But it's important to us that you have that information. So what we do is we typically get an example and we share it with you. Now, each bill is going to be unique to you, the customer. Your water bill is based on your individual usage and the fees and surcharges in your certain service areas. Our customer care team, if you'd like, can actually run a calculation on your bill to show you what these proposed changes, and keep in mind they are proposed, they are not final, might look like for you as a customer. And I want to point out that when I say proposed, the numbers almost always, in fact, I don't think I've ever seen them not go in the direction of the customer. So when you look at these numbers, know that they are subject to change and they are not final in any way. So if we look at a water customer for Santan, the average customer is using about 6,000 gallons. The state average is 7,000 gallons. So you're doing good. You're already conserving. Obviously, some people will use more and some people will use less, but that is the average for a residential customer. What this means based on the projects and that $50+ million that needed to be invested in the system is that the bill would potentially see a change of $3.61. Now, for Santan wastewater, it's different. We had to spend more than $200 million to fix the wastewater system. And it's not based on the amount of water you use. 70% of the water we all use goes into our yards. So it's a flat charge. It won't change bill to bill from the wastewater side. And it is a bigger increase. So we're projecting, or we've proposed, that the change would be roughly $24. And what that does is really address all of those improvements that have been necessary for your service. Now, I want to point out again, this is an example. So we had a gentleman the other day at one of the meetings who pointed out that he uses 1,000 gallons and change, which is amazing and exceptional. But that means his bill will look differently than the numbers on the screen. If you use significantly more, the same will apply. Also keep in mind that this is really about what kind of service you get. If you're only a water customer or only a wastewater customer, you want to look at those numbers. If you receive both, obviously you want to look at both. So just keep in mind that this is a proposed scenario and that our customer care team can run a more accurate calculation for you if you wish. Want to point out also the deferred debit column to the side. So this is already something approved by the Corporation Commission and essentially made it possible for us to deliver your service. It was approved in 2021. You saw some of it already in your rates. So really it's the remaining portion. It's been severely discounted. So you've actually saved quite a bit. But it will show up on your bills after these new rates go into effect. Now, it was approved at these amounts. Again, it was delayed for the customer's benefit, but I do want to make sure that you're aware that you will start to see it. Next slide, please. Before we wrap it up, and I think I just have 3 more slides, this is where I get to spend a little bit of time talking again about our operations and our engineering teams and all of the people that go into providing your service. Again, these are those unsung heroes ideally you never see any issues with your service. And this is really what they do. So I showed you earlier 300+ awards for safety and operational excellence. Those are given by the Arizona Water Association that represents all of the utilities in the state of Arizona. And 5 years ago, the Santan systems did not receive these awards. They were in no condition to do so. I can tell you now with great pleasure that your systems are operating at such a level that they are being recognized by the Arizona Water Association. We also have the Voluntary Protection Program, which again is another program that ideally you don't see. It is the highest designation for safety that is offered by the Arizona Department of Occupational Safety and Health. And it's something that you opt into. So you're actually putting your foot forward and saying, come and look at our systems, come and look at our building. Tell us, are we doing the best we can possibly do? So the state of Arizona has roughly 64 facilities that have been awarded this designation. So a small amount. And it's a very rigorous program. They go through significant audits by the ADOSH, and they come out and they look at those operations, and ultimately they will let us know, are you at that level or are you not? And if you're not, here's what you could do to get there. We're very proud of the fact that we have 3 facilities that have now received this designation. We were the first private utility in the state to receive the designation. We remain the only regulated utility to have this designation. And we're one of, I think, only 2 water facilities at all to have that designation. So it's something that our operations team, it's directly a result of their work. And finally, the 2023 Water Environment Federation Utility of the Future Today. So the Water Environment Federation, self-explanatory, but this is a designation that gets renewed every 3 years after a review process and an application. And the reason I want to call this one out is because the Santan service area is now contributing to what led to the success. This is about water reclamation. This is the water that we're collecting from your homes, from your businesses, treating it to an extremely high level, and then putting it back to beneficial use. So again, that's 13,500 acre feet of water that 5 years ago was simply going to waste. So we're very proud of the fact that this service area is now part of that as well. Next slide, please. I'd be remiss if I didn't leave you with some information about customer assistance programs. So we know these don't apply to everyone, but we certainly hope that if you or someone you know who is an EPCOR customer is eligible, that you'll make sure that they know that they can apply for these. So these are programs that exist today. We put them into service for the Santan area right from the moment we stepped in as the owner of the facility. And we have asked for renewal of these programs, and we expect that we will get renewal of these programs. So the first one, low income assistance. So you can get a $10 credit off both your water and wastewater bill if you receive both services from EPCOR. The application process is very, very simple. And the eligibility requirement is very, very simple. You simply have to be an EPCOR customer, and your income needs to be below 200% of the poverty level. So if you look at the federal poverty guidelines and you look at what 200% of that would be, if you fall within that area or you know someone who does, you can get this credit on your bill starting today. So this is not something that needs to wait until new rates are approved, and we really encourage you to reach out. The second program is actually one that a member of our team came up with because they are actually, they have a military background. So we're very proud of this one as well, because if you're going to be away from your home serving your country, the least we can do is waive your bill. So when you are deployed on active deployment, you're an active service member and your home will be vacant while you're away, we'll waive your bill entirely. And when you come home, we simply start up from there. There is nothing to be collected from you. We will not be saving up those charges. We simply waive the bill and thank you for your service. And then disabled veterans assistance. So the other side of the coin, if you have been disabled as part of your military service, regardless of which arm it came from, or arm of service, I should say, we want to make sure that you're recognized as well and that we're helping you. So you can also get a $10 credit if you apply for this program. And it is possible to get both the low income and disabled veterans credit at the same time. Next slide, please. So a few next steps before we open it up to the chat. We were obviously holding these in person and virtual sessions, and we'll continue to communicate with you as things change. We have this information on our website. This presentation will be there as well, both the printed or the copy of the presentation as well as a recording of it. We're going to keep doing that communication. We want to make sure you're not surprised by any changes that happen along the way. Now, the Arizona Corporation Commission's rate case process is very transparent, and you as a customer have opportunities throughout the entire process to provide your thoughts directly to the commission. And you simply do that by providing comment. But there are also some key milestones where, if you wish, you can call in or attend in person to share your thoughts. The first two will happen on February 13th. There's a session in the morning and then a session in the evening. And again, you can be there in person or you can call in. We also will have a public hearing on this application, again, overseen by an administrative law judge. So a very formal process where you have the opportunity to not only watch the whole thing if you want, but also, again, provide public comment on the first day of that hearing. And that is scheduled for March 31st. We've asked for a decision by September 1. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen some cases that have taken longer. So right now, the best projection we can give you in terms of when new rates might go into effect, and keep in mind, the numbers that you saw in this presentation are proposed. They are not final. would be roughly in the time frame of late summer. So with that, I think we will open it up to questions.
If you do have any questions, definitely type them in the chat.
We'll give it a couple minutes, and I know sometimes it takes a little bit to get the questions going, but we'll certainly leave it open for a couple minutes. And then if we don't have any questions, just know that you can go back if you wish and look at this presentation. You can always reach us through our customer care team. We have a dedicated email address for you to send any questions you might have to, and that's ratecasequestions@epcor.com. And of course, we have our website. I see we do have a question. I think that's our first question. Just pop it. Well, we appreciate the thanks. We were honored to have repaired the system for you. It was in very bad state, and we know that you deserved better. So it was our privilege. I'm going to actually ask Letitia Washington, who is Director of Rates for our company, to help me answer the question on the 8% debt and whether or not Johnson Utilities um, is paying for any of this. So at this point in time, we are the owner and the operator of the system, and Johnson Utilities no longer is involved at all. I can tell you that we, as interim manager, used all of the funds available to us through Johnson Utilities for your benefit. But with that, I'm going to ask Letitia to talk a little bit about the 8% debt.
Not sure what 8% debt that's in reference to.
Would you be able to elaborate on what numbers you're looking at? But I think the simple answer here, though, Letitia, is probably that Johnson Utilities is not at all associated with this application or with our current operations. Once we acquired the system, it became an EPCOR system.
Correct. She's referring to the 8 cents debt and where the dollar goes. I found it. Sorry. Yes, that has nothing to do with Johnson's Utility. That's the cost of our debt to finance the improvements that take place, the 259 million. So that's what that would be in reference to. So no, Johnson isn't paying any of that.
And that you see the dollar bill on the screen, and this is what it was in reference to.
Right.
A couple more questions. Are EPCOR meetings or operations open to public participation, and are there opportunities to do site tours? So we take safety extremely seriously, not just your safety, but the safety of our team. And these are our operating facilities, very high-tech facilities. We do, if we get a special request, for example, once in a while we get a school request, we can certainly look into arranging something, but we do not have public open house hours, if you will. But if you'd like to talk more about that, please send us an email and we'll see where that might go. Letitia, would you mind taking a question on, since the system was so neglected, how are the developers involved in paying for growth as we move forward?
So developers usually pay for growth through contributions and mainly what we refer to as a hookup fee. In this case, we have proposed a hookup fee amount for both water and wastewater, and those funds would be used in essence to help pay for growth, as well as any contributions we ask for from the developer directly. They would have to agree to it, and it's a process that we go through and evaluate on a case-by-case basis. For the most part, there are some standard agreements that we enter into with the developers, but again, it's on a case-by-case basis.
New question, is EPCOR getting water rights from the agricultural land that is being developed? So we have a very diverse water portfolio, and when we look at our water portfolio, It's really not just wet water. It's, you know, it's rights, it's credits, it's surcharge, those sorts of things. So we work closely with different areas. For example, in Maricopa County in the Maricopa Water District, as that land transitions from agriculture to development, those water resources are able to transfer over as well. So whether or not we're getting rights from the agricultural land, it's really something that I think our water resources team would be best suited to respond to. If you wouldn't mind sending us your email address, we will have them reach out to you and walk you through the water resources for Santan. Santan is reliant on groundwater, so we are looking for new water resources. We always are, because our focus is not to have just enough. We want to make sure we have plenty. You can send your email address to mywater@epcor.com or to ratecasequestions@epcor.com. And we'll make sure that that gets to our water resources team. Give it, we don't see any new questions. We'll just give it a minute or two. If you do have a question, pop it in the chat. We're happy to answer it. And like we just said, if we don't have the answer for you right now, and we want to make sure we give you the right information, we will make sure we follow up with you. I appreciate that. And I will make sure that the team knows that you said that we're all doing a great job and thanking us for a well-run operation. Again, I take no credit for it, but our operations team and our engineering teams and our customer service teams, water quality, all of those different, all of the people involved in your daily operations, they're very proud to provide this service for you. Well, with that, I don't see any additional questions, so appreciate that. This is coming from a 30-year utility operations individual, so coming from an expert, and thanks from them. So we will make sure we pass it along. Well, there are no other questions that have come in. So what we'll do is we will be posting this recording onto our website. Give us probably until the end of the day Friday, potentially Monday, just to make sure we can get it up and live. And the presentation will be available too if you want to download it or read through it. But we're happy to take questions at any time. You can send them to ratecasequestions@epcor.com. Certainly, you know how to reach us from a customer service standpoint. And we do want to hear from you if you do have concerns. Certainly, we'd love to hear from you if you don't have concerns, but we're always available to provide your service. So we appreciate you joining us tonight. And with that, good evening.